Hello and welcome to another episode of Inspired Content. We're looking at a couple more short stories out of the World's Best Science Fiction of 1969 and A Wizard's Dozen, which is a short story collection of fantasy stories. So, the two stories we're looking at this time is Time Considered as a Helix of Semi-Precious Stones and With His Head Tucked under his arm. So the first one is Time Considered as a Helix of Semi-Precious Stones by Samuel R Delany. And this was in the science fiction 1969, World's Best Science Fiction of 1969. And I have to say, I really liked this story. I will also say that the first portion of it was kind of tedious. The first little bit. I mean, I understand as we read further in that it was kind of necessary laying of groundwork. It sort of felt like a preamble that was just... And it also sets the tone for some of the language, the way that the story's told and spoken. It gives you some room to exercise getting used to that. But I just feel like it could have been much tighter as a mechanism, as a way of doing that. And I thought early on that I was not going to like this. This felt like a short story that got too long to be a really good short story. But it is a rather longer short story than most. But I really liked it. It's totally worth reading. I give it a 7.3 out of a 7.6. And I recommend anybody who can find a copy of it, give it a look. It's totally worth reading. The second story, With His Head Tucked Underneath His Arm, I give that a 5.2 out of a 5.6. It's a decent enough story. It's a decent enough premise. I think more than anything it comes across as feeling sort of like the story of justifying being a conscientious objector to a draft. And it's done kind of heavy-handedly in trying to create a fantasy story to distance it from circumstances that other people would pretty much recognize as, say, the Vietnam War. And the story was too tailored to make that point and not see much past it. So I struggled a little bit with that one. But the ideas they inspired, starting with a man trying to provide for his family and avoid a draft in a Three Kingdoms war gets caught and executed, but rises again from the grave and seeks out an enemy kingdom with which he can make a deal that will get him into the kingdom from which he was executed, and his remains were thrown outside the city and not given an honorable burial, to get himself back into that city as an assassin, to get his revenge on the king and the court that saw fit to kill him for not killing for them. And so sort of like a masked, shrouded assassin character who is really the avenging spirit of somebody slain unjustly. A person suffering from multiple personality disorder is assumed to be faking it to avoid the war, and the king orders them executed as an example. And they come back as a ghost who shifts from personality to personality and form to form, and is a one-person band of misfits trying to end the corrupt war that's going on that enriches the leaders of all the kingdoms involved in these wars. A man who refused to go to war for his king is executed, or at least they try. It's sort of like the story of how they tried to kill Rasputin, where he like hung, shot, poisoned, drowned, so on and so forth, and it all seems like none of it's working. And then they even try to behead him, and his head comes off, but he remains alive. And so now the entire kingdom is absolutely terrified of this being that they can't kill, and that they keep trying to kill, and he's some supernatural monster as far as they're concerned. But he uses that fear to take over the position of power. And once he's in that position of power, he institutes policies that make the kingdom prosper and pulls them out of the war and makes everything actually so much better for the kingdom that he becomes revered as a great and wonderful king. And when the other kingdoms that are generally at war start to come after their prosperous kingdom, he just goes out and meets them, and nothing they can do can kill him, and everything he does terrifies them until they surrender and submit before him. And so the kingdom grows and prospers beyond its original borders, until one day this immortal king chokes on a fishbone and dies. And so the whole empire collapses under the weight of no longer having this one powerful figure hold it all together. That's just the idea that came to me. It's somewhat silly, somewhat strange. You can play it comedic and you can play it very serious. But those are the ideas for the his head tucked under his arm. Now, this is the first of the ones based off of the Time considers a Helix of Semi-Precious Stones, is a science fiction in which people become archetypes, almost like memes, living, walking memes. And a court of them exists, sort of like a fairy court, but this is not a fairy concept, but a slightly more modern science fiction-y kind of type of that. And they conduct their own affairs within the broader human cultures and humans in general across social tiers, borders, and age groups. Information brokers who are taken on as sort of heirs to previous masters, that are the unstoppable hackers who have figured out and teach each other ways of getting past all systems that exist to protect information. And they exist within a world in which increasingly information technology has encroached into all avenues of human life, to the point where being able to access all tiers of knowledge is sort of the ultimate power. They do this within a system that increasingly is trying to stamp out their capabilities, fight them, and control the flow of information. And it's that contest of this underworld of information brokers and their people. They're gatherers of information, their distribution networks of information and contacts, and the upper echelons trying to control and maintain a stranglehold on information, be it copyrights and patent designs and industrial espionage and blackmail material, skills, just all sorts of little pieces of information, and that contest of elite, segmented, partitioned control over information, and the deep spine of the underground market on information. A master of disguise that becomes multiple men over the course of the story, only at the end to reveal that he is really a young woman who has adopted the identity of the man we thought we were reading the story of. So those are the ideas I came up with for this set of stories. I hope there's some inspiration in there for you, and I will see you for the next video.